Carrying that casket gripped me, man, because God had spoke to me. God says, this should have been you 2 times. And I knew it should have been. And so, yeah, it affected and messed with me mentally. That was in November, December. And then, like I said, a month and a half, I just gave my life to the Lord.
Welcome to the free sermon podcast of the Potter's House Church in Virginia Beach, affiliated with Christian Fellowship Ministries. Our vision is winning souls, making disciples, and planting churches. It's Tuesday, where you're going to hear a powerful testimony of God's grace revealed in human lives. Each Tuesday, you'll hear Pastor Adam interviewing pastors from around the world to share the mighty miracles that God has done in their lives to give you hope for yours. We share the stories of the men behind the messages you hear every other day on this podcast. Keep in mind that the free version only includes a portion of the whole testimony interview. To listen to the full version, use the links in the show notes to subscribe via Apple Podcast or supercast.tech. Every dollar goes to supporting world evangelism. Enjoy today's Testimony Tuesday.
Welcome back to Testimony Tuesday here on the VBPH Sermon Podcast. It's Pastor Adam with you once again. We are excited to be joining you once again here on this Testimony Tuesday. We've got another wonderful guest with us here on the line. And for those of you who are premium subscribers, you are able to see his beautiful face. Pastor Andy Cota, welcome to Testimony Tuesday, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, brother. I don't know if beauty and my face go hand in hand, but nonetheless, I'll appreciate the compliment.
It was just a figure of speech.
Yeah, for sure.
But man, thank you so much for making time for us. We had a bit of a back and forth to try to get to this moment in time, but thank God we've made it.
Yeah, for sure.
I think half of the battle of Testimony Tuesday is just working with pastor schedules, getting some open time, but praise God.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. So, Pastor Cota, we've been around each other for a while, going all the way back to Chandler days. I've seen how God has used your life, and just grateful for what God has done in you and through you. So it's incredible for me to see and what God is doing for you now there in Chicago. But for those who don't know you, why don't you give a quick introduction, you and your family, and what God has been doing there.
My name is Andy Cota. Obviously, my lovely wife, Elisa. We got saved I got saved personally in Glendale, Arizona. That's where my mom and dad pastor, Pastor James and Christine Martinez pastor, who I believe at one time were your youth leaders, if I'm not mistaken. But I got saved in 2005 through a tragedy. Obviously, my younger brother, James Martinez Jr., he was murdered. And so it really opened my eyes to reality. It's kind of, I believe, the intersection, the crossroads of my life. I was already going down. Sin wasn't what it was anymore. And so my life, my marriage, everything was kind of just unraveling little by little. And then this scenario comes up and it just really hits me. And so I give my life to Jesus Christ, get saved in January 1st of 2005. I get saved in my living room, but I decided to go to the Glendale church, where my mom and dad had been pastoring just, I believe, for that time, 4 or 5 years. And so go and, just obviously catch the vision. My mom initially got saved when I was a young boy at 9 years old. She got saved in 1989. So I grew up in the fellowship from the time of 9 years old to 14 years old. And then I made a decision to leave the home at 14. So I knew what we were about. I knew what our fellowship was about. And so it caught me right away. And just got saved, and God began to restore my marriage, my family. And we're just so thankful to be a part of what God did in Glendale at the time. My dad was at that time probably running 40, 50 people. And then just to take it from there and to see all that God has done and still doing there. So then I had the privilege to go and pastor a church in India, 2012, that was left to us by Pastor Pkwy and his wife Samantha. Did a tremendous job there. Took that church in Noida, India. And so I had a privilege to be a missionary there for 6 years and raise disciples. And it's great to see that church now as a church planting church. And so it's got a lot of disciples, a lot of couples. And so, my dad's continued on with that. And that's been a great blessing to the Glendale church. But we were just so glad to be a part of that. And then obviously bring it up to current, went to Chandler, was just stirred. Pastor Campbell had asked me about Chicago, and I was evangelizing, but it was a funny story. Pastor Dragoon is 2008. I was initially wanting to come to Chicago, and at that time, just things, logistics, and just different avenues of where the Glendale Church was at. We didn't pull the trigger. But I think God bringing it all back around, and so here we are now in Chicago. My wife and I thank God for her willingness to follow me. Now just experiencing, what God is doing here and helping us little by little. It's been like that, but we're seeing momentum and we're seeing God move, and just so glad to be a part of that. And, just for the fact that the privilege to serve these people and to be in this city. I love this city, but that's just kind of my life in a capsule of a few minutes.
Okay, well, we thank you for listening. This has been a wonderful episode of Testimony Tuesday. Oh, I'm just kidding. You told the whole story already.
Yeah.
But man, it's amazing, and I'm just really encouraged by the posts that I'm seeing that you've been putting on social media and stuff. The guys that are with you there, and seems like God's really doing a good thing there.
Yeah. And, obviously my she's the one who, I allow her to do that stuff. I'm not too savvy on social media, but no, just to let people know that God is helping us in Chicago. Chicago's been in Chandler Wing for 30 plus years. And so I just thank God for people not giving up on Chicago, for Pastor Campbell not giving up on Chicago. And yeah, it is. God has given us young men. They're starting to little by little catch the vision. Chicago it's a whole different beast. It's nothing like I've ever experienced, even being in a city like Delhi, India, where they have, 10 million plus people. Chicago's got little over 8 million, 8.5. But it's just the dynamics. You would think that, in terms of numbers, I would be used to. Yeah, I'm used to the number part of people, but just of how the city runs, how things go. And I believe truly this year, I'm just now experiencing the real Chicago. That's what everyone's telling me, which I kind of feel it and I sense it. It's a whole different beast, but but with all its ups and downs, this city, man, I mean, yeah, it's ripe for the taking, and I'm excited for what God has for us, and I'm believing God, and yeah, I'm thankful God has given us young men. And so I've got a couple that have really caught it and just really just pressing God to help us with the others.
Amen. Well, praise God for that, man. I'm excited for you guys. Chicago is close to our hearts. It was actually the first time we got announced we were going to go into Chicago back in 2005, and
God somebody, amen.
We got diverted by about 10,000 miles to the other side of the planet, but there was a reason why we wanted to go there. God had we had been on an impact team there back when the Bodnickis were there, believe it or not, and there's so much potential, so much opportunity there. So I'm glad to see that God is moving in your church.
Yeah.
So well, let's go back and learn a little bit more about you. Let's hear about your family life growing up. What was life like for little Andy Cota?
No, I mean, like I said, my mom, I remember, my mom not being saved. She divorced my real dad when I was 5 years old. That was back in 85. And then I remember, her sister, Isabel, was going to the Chandler church. And I remember her witnessing to her and telling her about Jesus and what God could do in her life. And at the time, my mom was, like every Hispanic family, they're Catholic. So she was trying to hear none of it. But I would see what my mom was going through. My real dad, my real father, it's an alcoholic, was never home, always going out to the bars. And so she just got tired of that, divorced him. And so there was a span there of 4 years where she was just, broken, and I seen it. And I'll never forget, she got saved at the old Washington building. I remember the one that they do the 180 at now. And so she went, and then I think she didn't backslide, but it wasn't like, she was going all the time. But then I remember going to Comstock all the time. She really locked in there. And then she married my stepdad, James Martinez. I remember him going in front. It's a funny, story. I remember him walking into church. He had an afro. And this was back in 1989 still. And he got saved. And then, then they started dating.
With 8 cents in his pocket.
Right. Everyone knows the story. Yeah, 8 cents in his pocket. I think he's probably getting himself a little too much credit. Probably had less than that, I believe. But nonetheless, though, they got married. And so they got married in 1990 after he came out of jail. Remember, he did 6 months in jail, came out, they got married. And, in the beginning, it's amazing because, life's a little rough still, because he's just coming out of the streets. And, we got an integrated family now. And so he's got 4 children. My mom's got 2. So we're an instant, Brady Bunch family. But I can't deny, what he put in us as young boys. He put in my brothers and I hard work.
How old were you when they got married?
I was 10 years old. I was 10 years old. And you know what, man, we weren't making it. I don't know if a lot of people, obviously, a lot of people don't know, but we weren't making it, man. I remember he's struggling to get work, not making too much back in those days, probably $8 an hour, maybe 9. And, and so I remember, man, going every day, coming home from school, while all the kids got to play in the neighborhood, man, we had to go, and he would make these drawn up flyers, and we would advertise to cut grass for $5 a yard. And so I remember, man, going up and down the street, passing out these flyers. He would tell us, hey, we had an old car. We called it the Cat. It was an old Catalina. I think it was like a 69 or something. Had no brakes, no tags or nothing.
Oh, man.
He would say, hey, have everything loaded up, the weed eater, the lawnmower. We got to go around knocking on doors, getting some yard so we can eat for the night. And so we did it like that for a while, man. But it taught me a lot, though. I don't say that with any kind of complaining, man, because it really did. It forged some stuff in us. And so that's one thing I admire, his faith, to believe God, to not give up, to not quit. And so, but yeah, eventually, God began to help our family. It was pretty rough for me. I just, cause I was used to just being with my mom and my sister. And so, moving forward, I'm 10 years old. So I only lasted in the house another 4 years.
And were you older or younger?
I was a middle. So my other brother, Mike, my stepbrother, Mike, he was the oldest.
No, I mean with your sister.
Oh, with my sister. Yeah, no, I'm older than my sister. So, but, so as life goes on, my parents, they're involved. They want to do the will of God. They want to serve God. And so, it's about maintaining a righteous and a clean home. And, by the time I step into my teenage years, I remember going to Crossfire. Being in Crossfire and stuff. But at that time, I was just too much being influenced by my peers in the world and at school. And so I just really,
Could you talk a little bit about maybe the struggle you had? You mentioned it was kind of rough for the two families to begin to, integrate with different, kids from different families coming together, trying to be a family. And so I'm assuming you had other brothers from Pastor Martinez that were older than you, and all of a sudden you're not the top dog anymore.
Yeah.
So there was some struggle there, huh?
Yeah, it was. I mean, not, and it was a lot, because, my dad, he was just coming off the streets. It's what kind of gives you compassion now when you look back, because you realize, man, you're trying to raise a family without knowing how to raise a family, right? It's one thing to be called that. It's another thing to learn that. And it wasn't just him. It was myself too. I was let down by my real dad. He was always promised to come get me, pick me up, and, he'd let me down weekend after weekend. So there was just a lot of that. But, um, no, it was nothing like, everyone was trying, but it was just so much dynamics involved as far as, streets, my stepdad just getting out of the streets. He had just gotten his kids back because they were living with their grandmother. Their mom was locked up. And so, we got all this dysfunction merging that God wants to heal and help. And, that takes time and there's processes to that. And so, yeah, it was a little rough in the beginning. There was a lot of fights. There was a lot of, this and that. But they tried their best, and that's what I look back at now. They were trying their best with what they knew how to do and how to handle stuff. And so, but yeah, it was a little, that sense was a little rough for me because, like I said, it was just me and my sister. I'm 10, my sister's 5. I'm 5 years older than her, and so now we have all these different dynamics happening. But yeah, so that's
yeah, it's
where
not easy, and especially for parents. Your mom, no doubt, is giving this man a chance, right? And he's radically saved and having to do jail time, but God is really helping them in a powerful way, and so that's that comes with the territory, I suppose. It's not going to be all roses along the way.
No, definitely not. And, and like I said, I mean, looking back now, they tried their best with what they knew how to do and how to do things. And, but one thing I do give them credit for, like I said, I mean, they always strive to try to live righteous and do the best they could. And, sometimes that didn't come out, in the best way, but nonetheless, they were just broken vessels getting repaired by God the same way, we were.
Yeah. So what about other influences? So, I mean, did they have you pretty much going to church all the time at that point?
Yeah. I mean, it was a lot of church, other than sometimes my grandmother from my real dad, she would come and pick me up. But there wasn't a lot of bad influences at that end because she was, a 70-year-old woman living by herself. So, but most of my influences were from school and just from young boys, young men just being knuckleheads. And the '90s was I believe, in my opinion, is kind of our generation of what I believe the '60s were. It was the '90s. It was a whole new era. Different things are happening, and it's just what I mean. All that lifestyle and it just caught up. And so I began to take a bad path very quickly. Had a great church time with church friends. Pastor James Rosario, Salvador, what I mean? I can name quite a few other kids, Wendy, Cornell. And so, but, I went to church with these young men and young women at the time. And so my mom and dad tried to do the best. But like I said, I was just too, between the rejection of my real father and those elements, I just, began to just take a turn for the worse, very quickly.
So how did your parents deal with that? Because that's not easy when you have a kid living in your house that doesn't want to serve God.
No. So what they did is, they weren't putting up with any of my garbage. I can remember, trying to sneak in ungodly music. Back in those days, it was tapes and CDs, and them finding them and destroying them. I would get mad, and then, and so they weren't going to put up with none of my garbage, and I respect them for that. And eventually, that's where the rubber met the road. Is that they said, if you're going to continue to live like this, and do this stuff, then, you can't be here. And I made that decision, so what finally broke the straw that broke the camel's back was I got busted, believe it or not, I got busted stealing from Albertsons on Alma School and Ray Road. And the cops busted me stealing from Albertsons, and yeah, of course, the cops, called my parents, and my mom has to come and get me, and my dad's at work at the time. And so I think this is during summer hours. And so I'm there with a couple of friends, and we're just goofing off and just, just making a ruckus and just, just stealing foolish stuff. And sure enough, yeah, they caught me. And so that was eventually what my mom and dad said, okay, enough's enough. Because at that point, wasn't doing good in school. And, I'm sure they sensed that I was already smoking weed and drinking and stuff like that. So they were just trying to be gracious to help me. But I didn't want none of it. So yeah, they made a decision and said, okay, man, if this is the life you want to live, this is how you want to live, you can leave. Which they didn't just kick me out in the streets. I had a place to go. They knew that I could go with my grandmother from her real dad's side, and so that's exactly where I went.
Okay, how old were you when that happened?
14 years old. So that was back in '94.
94. Okay, well, this explains why you weren't around when I first got saved in the Chandler Church in '98.
Yeah.
I didn't really know you at all until you came back later on in Glendale. But
right.
But yeah, my wife remembers being in Crossfire when Pastor Rosario was there, and those were some wild times, huh?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were.
She remembers that your dad would always say, he would always work in somehow that listening to Snoop Dogg, but he would never say Snoop Dogg. He would say Snoop Diggy Dig or something like that, and it was different every time.
He couldn't say Tupac, so he would say toothpick.
Somehow that sticks out to her.
Yeah,
that's what she took away.
That sounds like him.
But yeah, so 14, and then so where was your grandma at?
She lived in the south side of Chandler, right there.
Very close by. So
very close by, right there on Castle Lane. Yeah, right there. Pecos Lounge is at.
Huh. Well, not anymore.
Yeah, exactly right.
We prayed them out of there.
Yeah, so they're not there no more. But yeah, that's the street that I grew up on for the rest of my life.
So you weren't far physically, but as far as spiritually and emotionally, you started taking another direction.
Oh man, and that's one thing too, is once I left the church, I never went back. You know what I mean? I see some kids sometimes, which is it's good. They come go, but I never went back. I said I'm done, man. I'm not trying to go back. I don't want nothing to do with church. I want to do nothing to God. Quite honestly, I thought freedom was great because, like I said, my grandmother was older already. She was in her 70s. She cared about me, but there wasn't a whole much that she could do to me, as far as administering discipline or anything like that. So I was basically pretty much free to do as I pleased. And that's exactly what I did. I roamed the streets there and didn't go to school and, just did what every other kid was doing there on the south side of Chandler at the time, just getting high and drinking and, staying out all week, staying out all day. And so, yeah, it took a deep toll on me.
So how long did you find yourself in that place?
So honestly, I moved around quite a bit. I remember, believe it or not, I had a lot of people don't know this, but I had some cousins that lived in Wickenburg, Arizona. So
the thriving metropolis, as Pastor Greg would say.
At 16 years old, back in '96, I'd gotten in some trouble. So I thought, well, maybe, getting away from Chandler would help me. And so I went and stayed with some cousins, and my grandmother, like I said, she would disagree, but she wasn't going to stop me. So I went and lived there in Wickenburg, Arizona with some cousins. But as they say with small towns, sometimes they could be worse than in the city. So, and that's exactly what happened. I ended up getting deeper into alcohol and then ended up having a son at 96, 16 years old.
Wow.
So yeah, things went fast. And it's so amazing too how God uses people, because there was I wish to God I could find her or just see sometimes her history, but there's a teacher that I had. I went to school there for just a little bit, but her name was Miss Garcia, Rose Garcia, I remember. And she witnessed to me one day. She had noticed that I came to school kind of intoxicated, and she pulled me to the side and she was witnessing to me. And she invited me to her church there in Wickenburg, Arizona, called the Potter's House Church.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I said, man, this is a small world. I didn't even realize there was a church in Wickenburg called the Potter's House Church. So when she gave me the flyer, I had to go and check the place just to see. And sure enough, I mean, it's a small building, but nonetheless, I was like, this is too funny. But anyways, yeah, so that happened, man. And I ended up moving back to Chandler back in 97. Now I have a son, I'm with his mother at the time, but I get back into Chandler and things just pick up right where they left off. I meet up with all my old friends. And long story short, I don't want to be a father. I don't want responsibility. So I leave my son and his mom basically to fend for themselves. I tell her I don't want to be with her. And I go off and begin to live that life. That's in 97. So yeah, still 17, haven't even hit 18.
What do you think you were chasing? What was the goal? What was the dream?
You know what, Adam? I couldn't even tell you, man. Obviously, I know it was curses from my real dads. I mean, every male on my real dad's side is alcoholic. Um, that's what they did to their families. So I knew I was falling in that line. But for me, it wasn't even chasing nothing. It was just thought I was having a good time partying. But now that I look back in life and having to deal with some issues of myself, what I think I was really just dealing with was rejection. Um, that's what I was trying to feel. And though God put people in my life to try to help me with that, I couldn't see it at the time because, as in the case with life, so much of the time you project on others what someone else has done to you. You know what I mean? So in this case, what my real dad had done, I had projected out of my family that God had given me that was trying to help me. And so I think I was just trying to get that validation from him, honestly. Just trying to, because even living with my grandmother, he was hardly around. Just, and just wanted to be told that he cared for me, honestly. And so, but yeah, that's what I feel looking back now. Where I was trying to search and just trying to prove myself, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, no greater reminder as we're recording this ahead of Father's Day here. I think it'll be a few weeks afterwards when it comes out, but just an incredible reminder of how crucial a father is, especially for young boys.
Right.
That when that foundation is not there, it even unconsciously or subconsciously, it can lead a young man to just into a whole world of hurt, and he doesn't even know why. And like here you are, however many years later, 20 years later, still kind of wondering, why did I do all that stuff?
Right. Well, I mean, and honestly, it really helps me out here in Chicago because that's all these young men are looking for, man. That's all it is. I mean, we like I said, I mean, we went outreach at the Puerto Rican festival last weekend, and I can't tell you how many different hundreds of gangbangers that I have got to witness to and talk to about Jesus. But at the end of the day, Pastor Dragoon, that's what, man, they're just trying to fill that void. You know what I mean? They're just that rejection's in their heart. They're just trying to prove themselves in the streets. They're just trying to tell people how valuable they are. And but anyways, yeah. So that's I see it now, man. Obviously, sometimes it takes you a while to see that, but yeah, I see it now.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing with boys in especially is that they are capable of so much good, right? As young men, I mean, this is exactly who we want to come into our churches. We want a 19, 20-year-old young guy to come in and get saved because we know how much potential is ahead of him if he'll get his head on straight and get right with Jesus. But this is why young men are in so much trouble today, because they're capable of so much evil. Also, a young man who doesn't temper himself, a young man who doesn't control his rage or his sexuality, this is what causes destruction and devastation. So it's very, very few that stay in the middle. Like you're either going doing many great things, or you're going to be doing a lot of evil things.
Right. Spot on.
So you've got a girl pregnant, you've got a son, you kind of are running away from that and for the party lifestyle. I wonder, what is the connection to your mom and your stepdad at this time? Are they staying in contact with you?
No, I chose to sever that cord, that tie. Like I said, I absolutely. I mean, I went years without talking to them, and it didn't bat an eye. It didn't bother me too much. Just because, like I said, I mean, to me, looking back now, I just wanted that affirmation from my my real dad and my real dad's family, my uncles and stuff. They're real good to me. They've always treated me real good. Um, but I just, for whatever reason, I despised, that side. And so, yeah, that's why he never saw me. He never saw me around. I never went to any family functions. A very, I probably list on just a handful of times of just seeing him throughout those years of being gone. And, and some of, yeah, just looking back, it's just, I just didn't want nothing to do with it. I didn't want nothing to do with God. Didn't want nothing to do with church. And so I just stayed away from it. So
That had to be heartbreaking for your mom and dad, for sure.
oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, but they're good at letting you learn. And so they're like, no doubt that they're there, but they're like, when you need us, you'll be back.
So what I'm curious about, and one of my favorite questions to ask, is when people describe these times of their life when they were running from God and running from responsibility and living a foolish lifestyle. I wonder if you can remember, especially since you had some serious background in church and you kind of knew the deal, and you saw your mom get
Right.
saved, and you saw Pastor Martinez get saved. And so I'm wondering, can you remember, even in the depths and when things were looking bleak, do you remember God ever breaking through and giving you some revelation?
Oh yeah, a couple times. You know what? Honestly, to be told is, I was afraid to go to hell, man. I really was. So my sin was to a limit. Like, I mean, I could, God woke me up a couple times, but not too much. I got in a horrible car accident up north in Payson, Arizona, and quite honestly, probably should have died. I wrecked a truck on the side of a mountain, and I didn't even stay for the accident because I was drunk. So I took off running in the mountains. And so, but long story short, it came out in the paper, but they said that they're looking for the driver, but that he should have, they described that the driver should have some deep lacerations and some deep wounds because of the accident, but I didn't have one scratch on me. And I remember God whispering to me at that time that it's because of him. And I remember there was another accident that I was involved in. Obviously, when you're drinking a lot, man, you're driving ain't so well. But there was another accident I got into, and the same thing happened, man. And I just remember God speaking to me, and he says, "I spared you." That's all he said. Just very quickly, "I spared you." And so that's why. I don't want to fast forward too much, but coming to the point of where James Jr. dies, that's what really gripped me at him, because at his funeral, even though I didn't get saved at his funeral, uh, God spoke to me and says, "You should have been in the casket 2 times." And I couldn't shake that. I couldn't shake that anymore. But no, so I guess along those lines, if there's any, let me give some encouragement to parents who maybe have some wayward children right now. Number one, I know you'll never give up on them. Don't do that. Keep praying for them. But number two, the truth be told, whether they tell you or not, deep down inside, they're always going to think about something. I didn't think a lot about God, but I thought a lot about judgment. And any kid from church who tells you they don't, they're bald-faced lying to you. Because I'm one of those kids, and I thought about judgment quite often, and especially when those situations happened. And so I encourage every parent, keep praying for your kids and don't give up. But what you've instilled in them, believe me, whether they tell you, they're pondering, they're dwelling. And so as much as sin as they get involved, because I had to get worse before I got better, um, God's getting a hold of them.
That's often a sign of stubborn people. Things have
Right.
to get worse before they get better.
Right.
But stubbornness is not evil in itself, because you can be stubborn for Jesus, and that's a wonderful thing to be.
Right.
But it
Right.
has to be pointed in the right direction. So,
Right.
so between the time that you got in that car accident and the time that you went to that funeral for your older brother, I'm assuming, right?
As a younger brother, James Jr.
Younger
Yeah,
brother.
he was a younger one. He was
Well, tell me
23 at
about
the
what
time.
led up to that situation.
Well, he died in November 22nd of 2004, and like I said, at that time, God was already dealing with me. I remember my wife and I, we get married in 99. We hook up. We get married in '01. And so you figure from '01 to now, this is '03. You know, it's just a few years later. Our marriage is looking pretty crazy already. And so we moved out to Maricopa once again, thinking that, you know, if you move out from the place, you know, that's going to fix things, but you always got to take you with you.
Well,
And
you
so,
obviously, I mean, the reason that you're moving like that is because you understand that there's a problem, right? So
And
you
I'm
understood
thinking,
that I need to
I'm thinking
change some things,
location. Yeah, I'm thinking
right? Yeah.
location's going to fix it. And, and let me, if there's anybody listening out there who thinks location's always going to fix your problems, it's not. So this is all coming to a head. And at this time, I remember before James died, God is dealing with me. I'm living in a place called Maricopa. At that time, Maricopa, it's just a small development. There's nothing out there. It's not what it is today. And so I had to drive at least 45 minutes to work one way. And I just remember those times driving to work. One time in particular, I could have swore I felt like God was sitting next to me. And just the conviction of God in dealing with me about my sin and about my life. This is where it's kind of all coming to a head, and this is happening around September, October. And like I said, James passes away in November. And finally, New Year's Eve of all things, I'm partying, giving one last hurrah. I'm still not thinking about getting saved, but God really struck me. New Year's Eve, I'm partying, having a keg at my house. I got people there drinking, doing what we do. And I remember going to the restroom and looking at myself in the mirror, man, and just once again, just God dealing with me. And God asked me a question. He says, "Do you like the life you're living?" And honestly, I didn't at this time. So check this out very quickly, man. I remember right then and there, I said, "God, I'm tired." And I remember putting down my red Solo cup, man, full of beer, and just said, I'm not doing this no more. And I went to bed, didn't tell anybody. Just went to bed, and I got up that next morning, and I told God I meant what I said. And I want to give my life to you. And He came in, man, and God set me free right then and there. I know He said, I felt it. I felt it, man. He set me free.
Okay. So I think this is very unique. I've done probably about 100 interviews up until this point. And I think you're the first one, I'm pretty sure, that your salvation experience had nothing to do with church. That is incredible to me. This is just God's conviction coming on you.
Yeah, and like I said, I didn't get saved in church. Going to church and the decision where I was going to go to church, I made up that decision after I got saved. But yeah, no, man, I was tired. I got right then and there. And it's so amazing. So I'll tell you, I just didn't get saved. I got baptized in the Holy Ghost at my house. I remember that day, man. I said, God, if I'm going to serve you, I want all of you. And I remember going to my prayer closet, which I didn't call it a prayer closet, but I just went to my closet and I was just praying. And I said, God, I need all of you. I need all of you to help me. I need all of you to break these things in my life. And God came down, man, and filled me with the Holy Ghost right there in my closet. Just began to speak in tongues. And And yeah, so I didn't get saved in church, man. I didn't, and so that's why, I'm so encouraged. I know God moves outside the realm of church, which obviously we want people to come to church, but I know God can save people wherever and whenever He wants to, at whatever location, and that's exactly what happened, for me.
To me, that's really an evidence of the investments that your mom and your stepdad had put into you, and your experience in attending church services as a kid, and train up a child in the way that he shall go, and when he's old, right, he will not depart from
Right.
it. That's man, you are living proof of that. I think before we move on and hear about your new convert experience, I think we should go back and explain a little bit more fully what happened with your brother, because that is such a big piece of this puzzle that people who are outside of this situation or haven't heard about it is so important, not only to you, but also to Pastor Martinez. Could you go back and share a few more details about that?
Yeah, sure. So, James Jr. was, he was a great young man, man. He's different. He was a jokester. He was a prankster. Uh, Honestly, I haven't, forgive me. I haven't thought about that in a while. But yeah, man, he had a lot of friends. Everybody loved him. I think one of the reasons why he was such a loyal guy. And so what happened is he's in the lowrider scene. He's into other things. And, what people don't realize, that his murder is still unsolved to this day. Street talk is his killer, got to go back to Mexico and stuff like that. But, as far as justice wise, it's still unsolved to this day. And unfortunately, like, church kids do, sometimes they get involved in the wrong stuff. And honestly, my brother, got involved with a couple of people who, weren't loyal to him the way he thought he was loyal to them. And so a lot of people may not know, but, he got murdered at what you would call a home invasion. I believe it was on his girlfriend's birthday. And so, he had done some stuff that only very few people knew about. And he wasn't proud of it, but he was kind of set up and put in that position to do something. And when push came to shove, the people that supposedly were supposed to have his back didn't really have his back, and actually, turned around and used it against him. And so it was on the night of his girlfriend's birthday. He had gotten her a TV, I believe, and he was taking the cardboard out that the TV had come in, and he heard her knock on the door. And he had opened the door and not fully realizing that the individuals that were there for him. And they just basically riddled his body with bullets, man. And so
this was a hit job kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And the other three, and there was, the irony of all of it, man, is that, he was living with supposedly a good friend, which is very, very questionable, and his girlfriend, and he was living with his girlfriend. So those two couples living together. All those other three people had the opportunity to jump out the window. They all escaped except for him. And, I will say this. I don't know exactly sure what really gripped me about that is the fact that, that was one of the things too that hit me hard, is the fact that, I wonder if God was dealing with me so much to get saved before this time happened, just for the simple fact of, you never know, maybe your witness can change someone else's life or hit them in a different way, So, so this happens, and he's gone. But what we do know, and what we do, what I've heard, and obviously we'll see if it's true when we get to heaven. But I've heard he was crying out to God. He was shot, I think 9 or 10 times, and he was gurgling on his own blood. But one of the people that were there said they heard him crying out to God, asking God to help him. And I heard he was saying he was sorry. He was sorry. So hopefully, we're believing God, but I believe God's merciful and faithful. So Yeah, so obviously my parents had to deal with that.
That
I
hits a whole family and a whole community.
well, I mean, uh, my dad's a hard man in a good way, but he's a hard man. I've never seen my dad. He doesn't, I mean, I don't even think he cried. He cried when he got his own cancer diagnosis or anything like. He's not into crying, but yeah, I've never seen him break down the way I saw him break down that day when he got the news. Um, yeah, it was horrible. It was horrific, man, and it was actually this whole scenario involved my family, man. What I mean, we didn't know if they were going to come after my family or not, and so my dad was not paranoid, but he was just cautious and yeah, because it was a lot more deeper stuff than people realize, but yeah, so that's where it is. So to this day, it's not solved, but the streets talk, and so. But it's just something that my dad is, by example, is just left to God and said God's going to take care of it at the end. So,
Can you talk about what you were feeling in the, having to go to a funeral for a younger brother? Like this is not something that
yeah,
anybody wants to do.
obviously, I was a pallbearer. Um, I was a pallbearer. The last time I remember, this was, like I said, 2003 or, 2004 when this happens. And so, I think the last time James and I had hung out, we were partying obviously at his cousin's house. Um, but yeah, it really gripped me. I didn't get saved there, and honestly, I couldn't tell you why. Just you
It was
figure
Pastor
after,
Campbell who did the funeral, right?
yeah, right, yeah. It was did a funeral, and I didn't get saved then, but probably too much pride because I mean, the place was packed. Like I said, James was loved by a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of family. But like I said, I mean, carrying that casket gripped me, man, because God had spoke to me. Like I said, God says, this should have been you 2 times. And I knew it should have been. I knew it should have been. And so, yeah, it affected and messed with me mentally. That was in November, December. And then, like I said, a month and a half, I just gave my life to the Lord. But yeah, it messed with me in my mind, my spirit. I was broken. And, like I said, the judgment aspect of it, we didn't know all the details of everything until, sometime a few months down the road. But I mean, I didn't know that he had cried out to God and asked God, said he was sorry. But all I kept thinking about, man, is I wonder if he's honestly, I was thinking in the beginning, like, I wonder if he's in hell, man. And I wonder if he's crying out, and so that really got to me and shook me. But yeah, man, so they changed the trajectory of my life, and that's what, honestly, from time to time, I look back on it and says, man, it's this world. Anything the world will offer you is never worth it, man. It's never worth it. It comes at a high cost.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, this is obviously something you wouldn't wish on anybody. It's horrible when you have to experience death in any form, but especially if it's a murder like that, like somebody has robbed you of the relationship of having this brother. But it's not something that you would want to happen at any time. But from your own testimony, what you just said is that it changed the trajectory of your life. And you wonder if that tragedy had not happened, if you would have stayed in your sin, if you would have still been stubborn toward God,
Pastor Dragoon, you don't you don't understand how many times I've pondered that, man. How many times I thought about that, and just yeah, man, it's just crazy you mentioned that. But yeah, I thought about that many, many, many times. Like, I wonder, me, for me personally, if that's what it would take to shake me up and to wake me up. So.
Well, so this is how God works, though, right? This, God, for him, it's not that God is the author of evil, but he allows things in certain times to happen for certain purposes. And maybe, we can't say with certainty, but maybe the good that comes out of that in the long run is greater than the evil. And, we can hope and we can trust that in his final moments that that he cried out to God, and that there will be a glorious reunion one day when you enter into glory.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, the irony, right? Yeah. I believe God, man. And so, yeah, when we heard those words and when we heard that testimony, man, it was like really overjoyed. And I believe God is merciful, man. I mean, if the thief on the cross can cry out in his last second, no doubt somebody with, some bullet holes and bleeding on the floor crying out. There's, to me, God's no respecter of person, right?
So maybe at this point would be a good time to address our listeners, because, most of the people that listen to this are going to be pastors and disciples in our churches. But there are no doubt there's going to be somebody who listens to this who's not right with God, and who maybe like you is on a path that's leading the wrong direction. And I guess what would you say to you before all of this tragedy happened? What would you say to that person right now?
What I would say to that person is when God begins to deal with you, man, give in, submit yourself. A lot of what I went through in life, I could have, obviously could have avoided a lot of pain. Sin likes to wound you to the point where, salvation is great, but the process of God then healing you from those wounds can take a long time. And I believe a lot of those wounds can be avoided, especially, for young men and women who are going to church. Listen, man, my heart is for you. And I understand that the world sometimes seems appeasing. But I want to tell you, there's a very heavy price to pay. My family's paid it. I've paid it. And by all means, I would plead with you, man, if God's dealing with you and speaking to you, submit yourself. There's nothing, I tell my wife, there's nothing like serving God. And I wish to God, and my wife would tell me, because my wife, we went to school together, grade school, middle school, high school. And she would often, poke at me and says, I wonder if you would have gotten saved as a teenager, if I could have avoided a lot of hurt in my life. And she's saying that just to poke at me playfully. But the truth is maybe so. You never know who I could have impacted at that time. And not that I'm living with regret, but you just see how the plan of God is so much more, and it's so much more worth it. But the point that I want to emphasize, Pastor Dragoon, is to people, if they're listening and not saved, man, surrender your heart, because listen, the wounds of the enemy, man, the wounds that he wants to inflict on you, he wants to damage you to the point where, it almost seems like you're unfixable. But God's trying to prevent all that. That's why God's speaking to you and deal with you. So give your life to God and let God help you and heal you. And so that way, for like I said, for my family, what I've seen is the wounds of sin, man, run deep. And sometimes it takes a long time for God to heal that. He will heal it, but it'll take a longer than what I think he wants to do.
Yeah. And this is also a great time to encourage the church kid, because, sometimes we hear a testimony like yours, and, somebody who hasn't been out on the street, or, who got saved when they were 12 or 13 years old before they got into a lot of trouble. It's like, man, what does my testimony, how am I supposed to compete with that? But I guess I want to encourage people, because people like my wife, for example, and whenever she testifies, she always says something like that. She says that she watched a lot of people make the wrong decisions and go out and, get pregnant and party and, and do a lot of things that, and she was able to avoid that because, she stayed faithful, even when things were, tough on her too. But she kept coming to church. She kept staying in the right place. And thank God that she and we both got saved at 16 years old. And, I'm really grateful for that, because who knows what kind of trouble I could have got in, I'm
right.
Just because I come from a different neighborhood doesn't mean I couldn't get in trouble too. Couldn't. And we hear the stories, the sin will always take you farther than you want to go and make you pay a price higher than you want to pay. And so
let me, if you don't, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to put a plug in for the church kid that is serving God. And, you think, well, like your wife, man, I mean, I don't want to say this like I envy her, but I had an opportunity to grow up the same way, and I choose to neglect that. And I want to tell you, what my family life, and I don't know if family's perfect, but what your family's gone through, I can imagine just totally night and day, right? I mean, because your guys are starting from a place that, yeah, you guys are sinners. Everyone's sinners, but the wounds and everything that has been there in a lot of people's lives are not in your lives. And so the health and everything else of your family and everything else is so much greater than what someone has to do starting from, starting from the bottom, that's great. But once again, I'm just going back to the wounds, and if you're saved, if you're a young man, young woman listening to this, and you're saved, or maybe you're, what we call teenagers, stay serving God. Don't let the world, and thank God for women like your wife, young men and women like your wife, who stayed serving God despite it, because I believe that's a testimony in itself to say, hey, I stayed serving God. That to me is more commendable than the person who gives in to go off and backslide. To me, the person staying, I want to tell you that to me is that's phenomenal.
Amen. Well, we want to go back to the story of what happened after you got saved. God has done incredible miracles to get you where you were, but God's not finished yet. There's a lot of road ahead of you. But before we get there, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back after to hear about how God began changing you as a new convert. You had to make a choice what church you're going to go to. And so I want to hear what went into that. I want to hear about your discipleship journey. I want to hear how you got called into the ministry, and how you would make a decision to take your family overseas. I want to hear about all that, but we're gonna save that for our premium block. If you want to hear the rest, go ahead and hit the links in the show description below, and you'll be listening to that in short order. So if you are a premium listener, we'll be back in a moment. And if you are still on the free feed, we thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this, and we'll see you on the next one.